Someone say something so I know my sound's working.
You sound good.
Okay, good.
Welcome, Eric. Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour. We got a few people logging in, so I just wanted to say hello to all the attendees on our call right now. We're just going to give it another minute here to let a few more folks log in, and we'll get the show started.
Matt, you'll see I updated my photo this morning with a picture that's got 50% more gray.
Looking forward to seeing it.
Can you guys
Not
see
quite
me?
full gray yet. You know, it's a picture pre-kids.
Can you guys see me? I cannot see my image.
Yes, we can see you.
Weird. It was here before, but now it's gone.
Well,
It might be, do you have a little arrow to get to the next page?
No. No.
well, I tell you what, we'll give you the cue if we lose you.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I guess if you see me.
Well, I'll
Oh,
put it out
okay.
to the audience. Can everyone
Here
out
we
there
go.
see Mike? There we go.
Now I've got it.
Excellent. Well, we got a
When
good
you
crowd
asked
of
me-
folks here. This is great.
When you asked me to shut off my camera or, kind of go dark, I only went dark to myself.
Well, you're back. We're here. We're excited about today's conversation. We got a good crowd in the audience right now, and I tell you what, we got some good content. So why don't we get started? I want to welcome everyone here, and thanks for joining us today for our conversation around prefabrication and modular. And we're really pleased to have a conversation about real solutions for today's school building challenges. And I won't take away from the conversation. I'll just give you all a quick introduction about what to expect today with the tools and technology. Hopefully by now everyone's familiar with this format, but in case you aren't, all lines are muted for the duration of the call just to minimize background noise, and we're going to be leveraging our tools. So we have the chat feature and the Q&A available. Feel free to leverage the chat throughout to communicate with everyone in the audience. And towards the end, we'll be taking questions and just having a conversation. So if you would use the Q&A panel to submit your questions, I'll be fielding those, and we'll have a good conversation with the panelists here. If you have any issues, feel free to message me in the chat, and I'll do my best to help you from there. And with that, we wanted to start out with a poll actually and get a little bit of a sense of who's out there in our audience. So in a moment, you're going to see a poll pop up on the screen, and if you would be so kind as to participate, let us know who you are. What kind of organization are you hailing from? A private school, public school, program construction management, architecture, engineering construction, or something else? I'll give it just a minute here for everyone to weigh in. And then you should see it already. There's actually a second question down below that, so keep on keeping on. There's a question about, do you have any experience with prefabrication and or modular? And again, just to get a sense of who's in the audience here. Give you another minute to provide us with that second response. All right, we got a good mix here. All right, I'm seeing those responses slow down a little bit here. We'll close it up so we can get started. Thanks, everybody. All right, so yeah, we've got a good mix. We've got a fair amount of architects. We got some program and construction management in the audience, some construction, and we've got some schools as well. So yeah, you got a good mix here, everybody. And as far as experience, we're vacillating between some experience in pre-construction or modular. We got one with tons of experience and then a couple with a tiny bit. So I think you got a good range in the audience here, and panelists, hopefully that gives you an idea of who's out there. All right, great. Well, with that, I am going to turn it on over to Matt to get the conversation started.
Great, Laura. Thanks for that, and thanks for starting off with a poll. And it's a good reminder that there's a variety of experiences, a variety of positions, architects, owners, school districts, construction folks, but we all seem to be faced with the same problems. How do we deliver these really fantastic educational spaces that really our students deserve while doing it in an economical manner, something that meets the budget, and while also doing it in a timely manner and not taking up and disrupting our schools for too long of a period of time while we're delivering those facilities. And so over the years, prefabrication, offsite construction, modular has been sort of promised as a holy grail. And the question today is really, is it? What's the real scoop on prefab modular? What's our experience with it? What problems does it solve? And how do you mitigate any potential challenges along the way? And so we have a great group of panelists probably together. There's 100+ years of experience in education and school facilities. And so I'm really excited to talk to these guys about what they think and what their opinions are. So we're going to let each person introduce themselves. So Eric, if you could be up on deck here and tell us about yourself and what you've been doing with prefabrication at the district.
Well, I'm Eric Holm, Director of Facilities and Construction at Palo Alto Unified School District. I started my career actually as an architect specializing in school facilities work, and then I switched to be an owner's rep working for school districts. And I've been at Palo Alto now for 4 years. My background is in both art and architecture from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We started looking at prefabricated as a solution to a project that was had spent probably 14 to 20 years in development through various iterations, and was at the time woefully behind, and the public was upset. The community was upset, and it was also what we were working on was drastically over budget, and so we started looking at prefab here for both a speed and cost savings. And so for me, my background, this was actually just a project I did as an architect, which was we did a modular solar carport design. I just include this to sort of show that the going modular it's sort of a different way of working and a different mindset, and so it takes a little bit of a heavy lift to get over that inertia of making that decision. And so I had a familiarity with, just a conceptual familiarity. I mean, this obviously isn't a building, but I had a familiarity with all of the different thought processes of modular and what design challenges are inherent in that and ways to sort of get around that. And so this was a PC that I had designed in my life as an architect, DSA PC. And so working with, as we started looking at a modular solution that had both modular and a component of it was a DSA PC, I was pretty familiar with that. Going to the next slide. And these are some of the projects we've built that were not modular, that were custom designed. This is a multi-purpose building that also had an attached music classroom. And you go to the next slide, Matt. And then this was a library and multi-purpose building, and so you can see that we had we have different styles on our campuses, and a pretty high design sense or desire for some more uniquely designed spaces. If you go to the next slide, and then this is a 100-plus-year-old building that we're remodeling at our Pali High School main campus. It's the oldest building in our district, and this is the old the old library building. And so we've also got some old Spanish mission style buildings, and a lot of mid-century modern 50s style architecture that in Palo Alto we have a lot of Eichler neighborhoods. And so we don't have a one size fits all across the district, but in some cases which makes prefab beneficial in some cases and difficult in some cases. So when we look later at talk later about some of the things some of our decisions, you'll see part of it was an aesthetic reason, and we went with prefab for one particular site. And go on to the next person now.
All right, Mike, you're up. We're going from one amazing campus to another, or one amazing group of campuses to another amazing campus.
Yeah, and I didn't have that. I didn't add that many visuals. So I'll start off. I've had 30 years experience in operations and construction management in many different industries. I put you guys to sleep if I told you all the industries I've actually worked in. However, I've been at Sacred Heart Schools here for 9 years, and was able to work within a structure where we've been rebuilding buildings now for probably about 15 years, from our lower campus to the high school campus. The campus is about 62 acres. If you could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. So this is a nice aerial view of the historic past and the bold future, if you will, with the building in the foreground on the right side that is completely covered with solar panels, which allows us to have that building as a zero net energy building, one that we're very proud that is sitting on our campus and really helps round out our philosophy of sustainability and wanting to make sure that we are giving back to the community as a whole. In the photograph to the left, that is our historic kind of a landmark building where one portion was built in 1898 when the school was founded, and the other portion was built in 1915. What's remarkable about that building, or I should say this building, because that's where I'm sitting at present, is that it went through two major earthquakes. The 1906 earthquake, where the wing that was built in 1898 sustained some damage, and the ruins to that damage are actually on campus, and we have them in what we call the ruins garden. They were pulled over there by horse and chain and left there after the earthquake, and we've just used it as a sitting area and more as like a prayer space, outdoor meditation and that type of thing. So then you go to the portion that was built in 1915, and then you add them together, and they were both damaged in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake and closed for about 10 years until they were seismically upgraded and the buildings were repaired. On our campus, we boast having, as I said, zero net buildings and sustainable buildings. We have a LEED Platinum building, but we also have the first ever library building in the United States that's a zero net building, and it happens to also be the first the first school building in the United States that is zero net. Some of the architects that have been involved in our projects are Letty Matum Stacy and WRNS. WRNS is also the architect on the building that you see in the far right with all the solar panels on the roof. That's one of the most recent major buildings. They completed that building in 2019, and the students were in it about 3 or 4 months before COVID hit. And so we had to shift a lot of our resources, as I'm sure other in the audience and panel members, the schools had to change from running a school to also being a public health institute, and figure out how to get through not only the pandemic, but bringing the kids and the teachers back safely. And so that's one of the things that we worked on as an organization, which took us away from, say, managing buildings. But during that time, there was a lot of stress put on the buildings, especially with the HVAC and the electrical systems as we navigated that particular part of our history. So during this time, the state had certain parameters for licensed areas within schools, and we have a preschool that is licensed through the state, and they required us to have certain spacing for the student population. So at the time, prior to COVID, we had kindergarten and preschool in the same building. When they changed the spacing, we had to move the kindergartners out of the preschool, allowing the preschool to have the additional space. And for one school year, we had the kindergartners in the main building, in the historic building, but that wasn't sustainable. And come March of 2021, the state did not change the spacing. And so we had to scramble to find a place to put the kindergartners, because we didn't want the high schoolers to have to stay outdoors once again for that particular school year. And I was asked to find a place to put portables on campus. And if you've ever seen our campus, there's really no place to put anything. We could maybe use a parking lot or a practice field or something like that. But you have to, there's give and take. And I thought, if I'm going to have to build a foundation, I might as well not put a rented portable on these things. I might as well find a modular or portable prefabricated building that we can have into perpetuity. We have two on campus already. One is a residence for retired nuns, and another one is a concession building that is used as a locker room, restroom, and concession area for a couple of the playing fields. And so having that experience and being able to leverage that and work it into our architecture, it was something I was comfortable with at least considering. And I picked up the phone and I called Steve Winslow at XL and I said, hey, I've got an impossible task and I'm looking to do this. And by the way, I need the children in the seats by August 16th. And Mike, I have the perfect product for you. We have this company that we purchased called TimberQuest, and it's an amazing product. And he just went through, he kind of had me at hello. We had to make some decisions very quickly. I did commit, but then I did my due diligence. I went and looked at other prefabricated buildings and just felt that after seeing what was out there, the other options, what we already had experience with, and the TimberQuest product, I thought it was a no-brainer. There was no comparison. So were we early adapters? Absolutely. It was taking a leap of faith that what we were seeing in the way of drawings and pictures and renderings and things like that, that it was going to come to fruition and be as beautiful a building as it actually is, was something that we were all very pleased with. And I can tell you today, after being in there for a few years, the teachers, the students, the parents, the administrators, everybody loves the building. They would not mind one bit if we added more on campus. For us at the time, it was the timing and it was the money, but the design and the sustainability aspects of this particular building all fit within our nomenclature, and it was something that we could make work on our campus. I remember speaking with the Planning Commission and the commissioner saying to me, this does not look like it would match with the architecture on your campus. I said, actually, I think it will, and you'll be surprised when you see it built. And I can tell you, he did come out and take a look and said, wow, I am surprised that you were able to make this blend in with your architecture, and it's just something that helped us out in a tight spot. And as part of the narrative, we broke ground June 1st, and the kids were in the seats August 16th. So pretty amazing plight, and we're very pleased with the product. Oh, by the way, Steve did promise that I would get additional stipends if I did mention TimberQuest a number of times in my presentation.
Well, we appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for. We always love hearing about the campus and your experience. Tom, you want to tell us about your experience?
Launch into it. Okay. I'm Tom Hodges, principal of construction and project management firm FS3 Hodges. Most of my experience has ranged from being a staff architect at UC Irvine for a few years, running an office for many different districts throughout Central to Northern California, to probably the last 15 to 20 years been primarily based in Palo Alto as the project manager or program manager here, spanning 3 different bond programs. You can go to the next slide. So the most of my experience in prefab or modular has been mostly in either what they call skin systems, the prefab aluminum panels, or precast concrete skin when I was in the university, versus when I got into K-12 projects. We did quite a few schools using modular construction with both kind of varied levels of success when they were done. And that was both 1 and 2 story buildings. But most recently been in Palo Alto working on the program here. These 2 projects here are some examples of the completed projects we did in Measure A, which was probably the last 10 years or so ago. You can go to the next slide. This bond program was focused a lot on our secondary schools. You'll see a renovation of our library at Palo Alto High School, and then a 2-story classroom wing at Stanford Middle School. When I got here to Palo Alto, the emphasis was on growth. So we were really focused on adding classrooms throughout the district. And then when the bottom fell out of enrollment in Palo Alto, that shifted to where our next program, Measure Z, you can go to the next slide, kind of shifted to more of our support facilities. So here you'll see we at the elementary schools, we've been doing new multi-purpose buildings and offices. A lot of the classrooms have been modernized in the first bond. Office facilities and food service, you'll see on the right, that's the outside view of the tower building at Pally that Eric mentioned in his. You go to my last slide. And again, the other high school campus in the district is Gunn. This building you see to the left is under construction. It is a new administration wing on the left-hand side of the picture, and then the right-hand side is a new food service facility, indoor cafeteria, and then 2 culinary classrooms. One's a cooking culinary kitchen, and then the other is a lecture. And then on the right is a project we just finished. Again, another classroom wing at one of our elementary schools. Been working with Eric since he joined Palo Alto, and we've, like he's mentioned, we've have this Hoover project that we're working with TimberQuest on, that literally started design in the first iteration in 2010. So the community is definitely ready for a new building, and we're excited for which way things are going. So with that, Matt, we can get on to the rest.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. So now we're going to just shift into discussion mode. So I've got a series of questions, and I'd encourage the audience, again, to use the chat function, the Q&A function to ask any questions that come up along the way. But the first one, I'm going to pick on Eric to start with. And you mentioned a little bit about your campuses and how there's a lot of variety there. There's a lot of different architecture. There's a lot of different needs. There's a lot of different styles. So have you had any challenges finding modular or prefab products that will meet your needs, given the variety of use cases that you have?
Yeah, so as Tom mentioned, we're doing a TimberQuest inspired design right now for our Hoover campus. It's about 13,000 square feet of the TimberQuest product, the PC one-story TimberQuest product, similar to what Mike installed over at Sacred Heart, and then another 44,000 square feet of custom prefab two-story and MP building. So we have this large campus, and we made a decision. We actually had a completed DSA approved project that we had bid right before COVID started, and put on hold. And by the time we looked at restarting it, things had changed, and our perspective had changed, and also we had made some changes to some district standards that meant that what we just designed was not going to meet our intent, and also there was changes at DSA that was going to mean updating those buildings. We're going to have to end up going through a rehabilitation REH process, the ones that we weren't touching, and so we kind of recrunched the numbers and looked and said, we have an opportunity here for a campus that also had no work done to it since really, other than cosmetic work, since its inception in the 50s, and so it needed everything, and really had the opportunity to say, let's revisit this. But that also meant we had a constituency that was really nervous about the fact that this project had gone on for so long, and didn't want to see it linger another decade or so. And so we committed to a fast track project, and we actually first started with a custom design, and we were working at sort of lightning speed, and we got our schematic design developed enough to realize we could, knew what we wanted, and the price was about double what we wanted it to be, and so we were pulling our hair out and trying to figure out alternate solutions, and I've always just sort of followed what's out there in the prefab marketplace, and had looked at numerous other products in my past districts as well, and there was always compromises that I always felt didn't justify going with the prefab. Either they didn't work with the site we were trying to shoehorn them into, or they didn't work aesthetically or whatnot. And in this Hoover site, it's in an Eichler neighborhood, and so there was a need or a desire on our part to make it, try to at least have a dialogue with the neighborhood and not stick out. And so I had toured the Sacred Heart building and knew what it looked like, and I'd followed it, and we called up TimberQuest and went and looked at the building again and said, "Gee, could this solve our speed need and cost, and help us with the cost, and also still address the aesthetics?" And for us, the aesthetics was a big part of it, because we were trying to be a part of a community fabric that had a pretty strong design sense or design aesthetic, and recognizing that we weren't designing an Eichler, but something that had a vernacular or a feel that could at least have a dialogue with the neighborhood. And so that's what led us to ultimately make the decision to go with the TimberQuest product, and we've got the PC portion's been DSA approved, and we're under review now for the custom parts, and we're about to break ground in about a month.
That's great. That's great. I'll shift now a little bit, and Tom is the self-described prefab skeptic maybe, or just isn't, he's not the cheerleader. He's kind of looking at it through more of a critical eye than people who are sort of advocating for it. And so the question for you, Tom, is that in your past where you have gone through, whether it's modular buildings or skin systems, what's your experience with that prefabrication as far as the impact on the design process, the permitting process, procurement? What for people who are maybe newer to it, what are your sort of look out for this during the sort of nuts and bolts of the process?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, most of my experience early on was both positive and negative. Most of the, and these are K-12 public school clients, and they were pushed to modular mostly because of, like I said, growth in the area was so high. Speed and control of cost was, really an overriding factor to going with modular construction. And like I said, some of those were, 2-story buildings and single-story buildings, both, even modified with some custom construction around for things like elevators and stairs. So those are, they met the challenge of, cost and speed. But where we really lost it in the final product in the end was we weren't really getting the quality of facility that we were expecting, especially for, these high performing high schools, as an example. So I think, whether it was, we had some challenges with sort of the quality of the product not really lasting. I mean, we were starting to see wear after 10, 15 years where, we were building for 50, 70-year length projects. And then other things like details of, acoustic sound transmission between walls and floors. Those were some of the things that we just noticed, 5 years afterwards, and doing a master plan 10 years later in the same district. And we were already talking about, we're going to have to do some major modernization to these buildings at some point. So I think those were kind of the, what I found, and why I'm, looking at TimberQuest for this Hoover project. It's really different, and so in this case, you're not using modules that are just pre-manufactured somewhere in the valley and bringing them over and trying to put lipstick on them. I think the bones of the TimberQuest product are much more aesthetically pleasing, give you, I guess, a sense of solid construction, as opposed to, the modular construction that you saw 20 years ago. And then just the ability to adapt to the various programs that we see throughout the district, whether it's an elementary school or even thinking ahead how we might apply it to some of our secondary schools. So that's been, again, I haven't seen the completed product other than, touring Mike's project and seeing a school over in Pleasanton that you guys just finished. But that was during construction. The other thing I'll point out is when I did visit that school in Pleasanton, I was amazed at how efficient the construction was going. You walk through, there were 8 classrooms in a row, and you could see, the trades working in 2 classrooms at a time. And just the progression of how they were putting things together. That was eye-opening for me. So
that's great. That's great. And so since you referenced Mike's project, maybe we'll throw this next question to him. And it's really, did prefabrication live up to its promise? And maybe, you talked a little bit about your TimberQuest experience, but you've also had experiences with other modular projects. So, what can we as an industry, there's designers on this call, there's construction folks, there's owners, but as an industry, what can we do? What's the challenge to sort of do it better and meet the end users' needs better? What's your thoughts around that?
So kind of a compound question there, Matt. I keep thinking about the one insurance commercial where the guy says, we can't, this is not your parents' way of doing things. It's different. And I'm just thinking, this isn't your parents' modular. And it's not the modular, that I went to school in, quite frankly. It is completely different. And I know when we embarked on this, there were a few parents that were saying, you're doing what? And our kids they're gonna do what? They're gonna go to school in modular buildings at Sacred Heart schools. And so it was definitely a leap of faith. But knowing what I know about the modular systems that have been out there for many years, and the offerings that they had, it was very one-dimensional. There were some new iterations of the same type of building, but the exterior aesthetics were different. You were able to paint the pig, as was said earlier. There's a different offering, but the bones of it are the same. And so from that perspective, you have people's perception of what that means to have a modular building. And then you look at the TimberQuest product, and as Eric pointed out and Tom pointed out, the structure of these TimberQuest buildings with the laminated panels, it gives the appearance that the building is very sturdy, that you do have a mixture, if you will, of traditional build and the convenience of panels going up. Our building, although Matt allowed 2 weeks, went up in 3 days. So yes, a lot of stuff had to be done on the heels of that, but there are some definite advantages. There are some perceived disadvantages. I can tell you that the tech folks, the IT folks, it was very difficult for them when they said, what do you mean we can't have an outlet or a port here? What do you mean we can't put conduit in this location? For me, I was saying, look, the chase is already there. It's pretty simple. I mean, maybe some of the runs have to be longer, but you can make this work. Just think about it in a different fashion. So I think from that perspective, as long as you can deliver the infrastructure and what I will call a smart design, I think that I don't see how, because I'm not really thinking about it in different terms, other than being able to have multiple floors on these things, which I believe you now can do multi-story. I'm thinking that the product worked well for what our needs were. And even in the future, right now, everyone's still enjoying it. We've used it now for kindergarten. We used it for junior high art. So we converted one to an art class, and then we converted it to a daycare, after school care facility. So it's meeting many needs. And as our campus fluctuates and changes, that building is allowing us to change with it.
I love hearing about changing uses, because I think that's something that's so important that we keep a track of, that we aren't building buildings for day one use, right? But it's for the next 50, 100 years, and how do we make them adaptable to that? I think that's really important. This next question I wanted to hit.
Matt, before we go on, I actually want to share two sort of caveats for the owners out there. In that, one, in my career as an owner's rep, I had a project, it was custom design, where we had done a ton of community, school community, teacher community engagement, and how to design all fully baked schematic design. And the architect called me and said, I need you to come to the office and look at something. And one of his guys had just gotten bored over the weekend and came up with a whole different layout. And I was like, no, we're not changing. And he said, well, let it sink in. I think this is better. And ultimately we went with that. And that's been a kind of a goalpost for me, or a something to refer back to, in which case, both that experience and then my past as an architect make me, in some cases, the worst client to work for. I drive the architects crazy because I push them really hard, and I'm not afraid to make them throw out their design and redo things. But ultimately, we've always come up with something better, and I use that experience as my gut check to say this is worth spending more time to design it. And I would say with the prefab, that's almost even harder. That the inertia of the prefab system is you're going to use this system, and I think you do have to be strong and adamant to say, yes, this is the system we're using, the bones, but let's talk about how we can adapt it to either our district standards or our site or our aesthetic or what have you. And in a similar vein, I would say that the one big red flag or warning on a prefab is that typically as owners, we give a design professional our technical standards of what is our district standards for finishes, for EMS controls, for lighting controls, for all sorts of things. And a prefab, whatever company you go with, they've already worked out a system, and it may be different from yours. And you don't get the same sort of, you end up having to have those conversations over again to vet how much committed you are to your system versus their system. And sometimes you have to make sacrifices, or you explore the cost of those sacrifices, those costs of those decisions in a different way than you would normally. When it's a custom design, it's just, these are our standards, do this. And so I think in our design process, going with a prefab, that's been a lot of our discussions of like, well, this is what is baked into the prefab system. And we said, okay, how can we change it? And so similar to Mike's comment about the IT people not getting plugs where they wanted, we've had to really have those conversations that in some cases it was a million times easier to design the prefab because it reduced all of the decisions to this is the size we're going to be, this is the metric, the building blocks we're working with, and so the schematic design happened real quick. But the nuts and bolts has taken a lot longer because we've really had to vet systems and revisit conversations that we've had over our district over a number of years, had to all be redone on one project to make sure, do we want to change or do we want to go with what was baked into the system? So I think as an owner, you do have to be prepared for that, to not sort of just think it's going to be autopilot or just accept what's in there, but just know that might be changes.
Yeah, it's a great point, and to put so much more emphasis on that sort of early procurement and vetting of the systems, right? So what you're getting, what the limitations are, and what the limitations, what can be changed, what can't be changed, and what those guidelines are, and understanding that, pretty early in the process. Well, good. Laura, I wanted to check with you. I think there were some audience questions. I've got a few more questions, but maybe it's time to take a couple of audience questions.
Sure. Yeah, well, why don't we start when we had one about supply chain challenges, and we touched on this a little bit, Mike, with your experience going through COVID, but just wondering sort of the progression over the last 4 years. Have supply chain challenges over the last 4 years impacted or enhanced your decision to use modular or prefabricated buildings? So Matt, I don't know who you'd like to have take that.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick on Tom for that. Like, what have you seen for this kind of supply chains, and does that, given the sort of all the hiccups we've gone through for the last 4 years, does that sort of steer you more towards or away from prefab, or just change the way that you sort of think about it?
Yeah, I'm not sure it had a huge impact on prefab. The supply chain issues and the biggest impact that we've had is more early procurement, right? So you could kind of consider that, I guess, but I mean, whether it's switchgear or HVAC units, probably the biggest change in the last 5 years is we are now, pre-purchasing equipment that's got a long lead item. before we, in a lot of times before we even go to DSA, right? So I think that's really been the bigger part of that. I don't know that it, because we haven't really dealt with structural component prefabrication as much. It's always been geared towards, what's holding up our projects, and the structure wasn't really the issue. It was, all the electronics and other components that were leading into that. So yeah, I don't know that really impacted us as much as just trying to get ahead of the long lead items.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think I can add some color to this, and the question was about the decision to go with prefab and supply chain. And I'm going to change that question slightly to answer this so that you can understand the versatility of the prefab. There were a number of times when Matt would call me and say, well, Mike, I got a problem, and this particular siding or this particular thing that I showed you and convinced you was probably the best way to round out this part of the package is not available. And, I've got another product. And so that happened a number of times to the point where I finally, one of the times I was like, well, wait, let's just redesign it. And Matt's like, well, we can't really do that. And so what actually helped to have the prefab was to be able to switch the parts and the pieces to actually make it work. If you had the standard things that were needed, he could switch them out. And so from a supply chain, I may not have been thrilled with it, and they may have had to figure out a way to adhere, say, the siding different than it was actually spec'd. The way this particular prefab was designed allowed for that substitution. And so that actually saved us on the timing and deliverables with this project. So I think that might help shape that answer.
Yeah, that was an interesting time trying to build it during all the COVID impacts. Not sure that probably gave me a lot, receded my hairline a little bit during that process. Laura, what else do we have for questions?
Yeah, we've got one in the chat from Tim. Where does TimberQuest fit cost-wise as compared to the traditional custom design buildings and the DSA box on wheels?
Yeah, so I'll answer that one. TimberQuest is a little bit more than, say, a standard modular, and a little bit less than conventional construction. That's typically where we land when we've been in a competitive situation. Is a little bit more than modular, a little bit less than kind of standard conventional, which we feel really good about because we think it's miles ahead of custom design as far as just quality goes. As far as comparison to your standard drywall box with a drop ceiling. So we feel really great about that price point. We don't usually compete with sort of the portable market. That is, much more lower price point. We would never be able to compete with that. That's just a different product. So we don't try and live in that world. But if you're talking about the permanent modulars or conventional construction, very competitive.
Great. Well, I've got one more in the queue, and it's about selection. So how did you go about selecting the product you used for modular or prefabricated? Was it hard bid or best value selection?
Yeah, and I think probably I'd like to hear, we've got two different perspectives, right? We have the public and the private perspective. So maybe, Eric, do you want to start with the public perspective and kind of what that procurement process looked like?
Sure. So for us, because of us, we chose the TimberQuest in a large part because of aesthetics. It was quality of build, but also there was a strong aesthetic desire. We made it a district standard for that site, and so we actually made the TimberQuest portion, which is the pre-check DSA pre-check portion. We determined, and we did a board resolution with our attorneys to make it a district standard. And then we did a lease-back procurement model, and it was real important for me that it was something that anyone could that had cross-laminated timber experience, because the TimberQuest product is a cross-laminated timber building, that anyone that had experience with cross-laminated timber could actually bid and execute, and looked at the TimberQuest portion, which, as I said earlier, is about 13,000 square feet out of our and we have another 44,000. It was about a fifth of the site was the TimberQuest. That someone else could come in and build the custom CLT building that we were designing. We were designing with the same architects that had designed the TimberQuest, and so it was definitely the same vernacular, the same style, the same architecture, but it was designed so that anyone could come in and build it. We had some bidders that wanted to use an alternate prefab, essentially substitution request, and we told them no, because we had very specifically sought out this product for the way it would fit in at the one-story level. So we did go with a sort of a hybrid of a sole source district standard for one story, and then the rest was custom and done through a lease-back.
Eric, and I know you had to convince the board on that, and you had to bring that to them and show them the path that you want to go down. So, and I think Mike has a similar story. Not a public board, but still had a board to satisfy and convince, and you had some skeptics. So, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about your process for procurement?
Sure. I was thinking, well, mine was nothing like Eric's, because we enjoy certain relationships, but certainly, right, Matt, that the decision wasn't made in a vacuum. I had to convince not only school administrators, but then board members and site committee members that this was the best way to go. But understanding, I actually had no time to do that. I mean, we had everything. Matt knows we were on the phone till after 9 o'clock at night with the planning commission to get the conditional use permit, and on the heels of that, we had to hold off on any approval because we didn't have DSA approval at that time. So it was a lot of being a leap of faith. But I think that having a professional organization such as XL Construction, and Steve, I mean, I still get points for that too, don't I? And then the relationship we had with the town and the building department and the planning commission, and then others that were part of the process and the board. Yes, did we have to sell it? Yes. But nothing like going through a formal process. I think if it was normal, if someone came to me and gave me a year to work on it, we'd go through the same processes that Eric had to go through. But that's not what happened. I was told this in March. Matt knows this. He was on vacation, didn't think anything was going to come of it. And he got a call from Steve saying, hey, by the way, Sacred Heart pulled the trigger. It's just one of those things where we didn't have much time to go through all of the processes. We still did, just so that we were able to do the due diligence, but not the same barriers.
Great.
I'll add that we had because we had been so long in this process and design, and we were trying to hit a target end date, we did not have time for the code change that was coming into effect. And because of the PC nature of the project, or of the one story, we were able to convince DSA that it should be an increment project, and that we could submit some increments ahead of the code cycle and lock in the whole design on that continuous same code cycle. So that actually helped us as well.
Yeah, 2019 code is helpful. I had, we have just a couple minutes left, and there's one last question I want to ask for each of you. So we'll call this the lightning round. But the last question is, what are the final words of advice for others, who might be considering prefab, might be considering modular, things that we haven't talked about yet, but and Tom, I'm going to start with you, but what is that sort of final words of wisdom that you could impart to others, that might help them down their journey?
Well, I'd say three things real quick. One, do your research on what prefab opportunities are available. Usually you start thinking about prefab when you have a challenge, right? Whether it's a time challenge or cost. So there's a lot of products out there. Sometimes we don't have enough time to even research them, but if you're in that position, I would do that quick. Second item is trying to get ahead of your political atmosphere. And the thing that Eric really had to work hard on was changing the perception here in Palo Alto that prefab was a good thing. And that took an awful lot of time. So the fact that he got ahead of it and before it really became mainstream, I think was a huge reason why we ended up getting Hoover through the way we did. And then the last, Matt and I were talking before, it's just meeting with whoever your permitting agency is early. And then often as you go through the design process, whether it's the state like we have to deal with or a city or a county, definitely go through that early with your team and make sure you're ironing out problems as soon as you can.
That's great. Mike, next lightning round to you. Same question. What words of wisdom do you have to share with anyone going through this same thing?
So I am going to echo, do your homework. The prefab solution isn't for every building. It isn't for every process. It definitely was for us a cost thing and a timing thing. We were fortunate enough to actually have a donation that had been marinating for quite a while for this specific area. So we were able to use half of the cost of the building with that particular donation. But I think for me, what I was really thinking about is, I think it's important to understand that with this style, there are some options that you can be flexible. You can communicate between classrooms. You can use garage doors versus, traditional doors. You can add plumbing or not add plumbing. I personally would make sure that we added solar next time and skylights that I know Matt doesn't like, but I do. That would help the daylighting and things like that, and just manage the expectations of those who are involved in the project, and then eventually the people who are living in the building.
That's great. And you can't get too mad at me when you eventually walk through Eric's building and see skylights in it, because he's getting a couple in the NPR. And then lastly, Eric, what's your words of wisdom for folks in the audience?
I think similar to Tom is do your research. You have to find the right fit. I've looked at several for different projects over the last decade, and had not found the right fit, and some that were perfectly good solutions that just didn't fit the project at hand. And so I sort of filed them away. And TimberQuest was one like that. I'd actually looked at it a year before, and so this is pretty cool, but this doesn't work. But I think and then a project came up that I never in a million years would have imagined it would have worked on, and it did. And but I think part of that was that I had happened to tour it with my CBO, and so when it came back around, and she liked the dollars, because that's their perspective, and I said, well, this doesn't work for us. And then when I was able to bring it back, I was like, hey, remember that thing that would save us money? I've got a use for it. And then for the board, I wrote about 5 or 6 white papers, educating them on what other prefabs were, descriptions of other ones that were out there on the market, and why they didn't work for us, and what it meant from a schedule standpoint, what it meant from a cost savings, what it meant from an aesthetic standpoint. And so I did a lot of work educating the board, to the point that I had one board member say, "Why don't we do this for all our projects going forward? Why are we even designing anymore?" And I was like, "Whoa, hold on." So I think it does take some education and some. It took work, so it's not just like, "Hey, we're going to just go with this," unless you've done it before. So that I think that's the caution.
That's great. That's great. Laura, can you pop up that last final slide? I think we're right at time. I just wanted to thank Tom and Mike and Eric for joining us. I think that your knowledge on this topic is invaluable to everyone who's in the audience, and as we're all going through and trying to find better, faster, cheaper ways of delivering these buildings. TimberQuest, we are going to be at the Cash Conference. We have a booth, 512. I'll be there. Steve Winslow will be there. So please stop by and see us. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email's on there, matt@timber-quest.com. And with that, I think we're right on time. So thank you again to everyone who joined us today. And thanks to Mike and Eric and Tom and Laura for a great discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.